welcome to the Friendly Neighborhood History Channel and to our live stream Q&A part 4 of our at least for our bonus one. This is the last of the bonus live streams that we are doing leading up to the 4th of July, but we are still broadcasting, as we always do, every Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. So we have been broadcasting since last Friday, the 26th, and we're broadcasting, doing our live streams all the way until the 5th. So we have a live stream today. We have our normal Friday, Saturday, Sunday schedule, although we have some perks because the 4th of July is indeed coming up. We will be doing our usual Friday Q&A tomorrow at 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So instead of noon, which we've been doing all of the extra days, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and of course today, Thursday, we will be doing 6 o'clock tomorrow. That's our normal time on Fridays. And then on Saturday, we have a regular time of 3 o'clock. That's 4th of July, America's 250th birthday. It'll be 2 hours long, though. So please join us for that 2-hour-long Q&A. And then on Sunday at 4 p.m. Eastern, we will have our live stream lecture. I will be dressed up on Saturday, by the way. It'll be a lot of fun, so we're really looking forward to that. So before you go out to your barbecues, and before you go out to see fireworks and go to parades and picnics, or maybe after some of the picnics and the parades, come and join us and get some history answered. It's going to be, we almost never do this with Q&As. Q&As, it's always wide open about what you can talk about, usually within the parameters of talking about history. But this Q&A on Saturday will be, I want you to be there, and I want you to only ask about history and social studies regarding the U.S. It's going to be a U.S.-themed, U.S.-only, exclusively American history Q&A. So come ready to learn about, talk about, and ask about American history, because for 2 hours, we will be talking about that with a very special guest at 3 p.m. Saturday. Please check that out from 3 to 5. And then on Sunday is our live stream lecture, and I will be lecturing on the history of the Declaration of Independence and America's founding, a topic I've done before, but one I'm really, really looking forward to. Hello, Solomon. How are you doing? Good to see you. Happy birthday. And yes, we are live here at the Friendly Neighborhood History Channel, where we do history in a friendly, neighborly manner, 24/7, 365 or 366 days a year, depending on whether it's a leap year or not. We cover all different types of history from all different eras and periods. And so I'm going to find a nice historical U.S.-themed background. Okay, this is Andrew Jackson leading his troops at the Battle of New Orleans, one of the early great American victories at the tail end of the otherwise unsuccessful War of 1812. Jackson and the Brits didn't know, but the war had already ended with the Treaty of Ghent in Belgium. Obviously, with news traveled across continents a lot slower back then compared to now. And so the fighting continued in certain places of America, including in New Orleans, where a very small American force backed up and defended the port city of New Orleans against a much larger British army of nearly 10,000. And Jackson won a lot of accolades for that and became a national hero. And this is what led to his rise to fame and eventually his political future as President of the United States, one of the most important presidents in American history. So it all goes back to this battle, the Battle of New Orleans in 1815, January 8th to 9th. 1815, at the tail end of the War of 1812. So there's a little bit of history for you, a little bit of American history. If you like this kind of history, or any kind of history really, double tap the screen, like the live, and subscribe for more, and check out all the live, long, and short form content available for you 24/7, 365 days a year. What do you think about General Lee? Robert E. Lee is one of the greatest American generals, if not the greatest American general in history. He single-handedly, I think, kept the Confederate cause alive. The Army of Northern Virginia was a terror to the Army of the Potomac. Lincoln's generals were way too passive, despite having more manpower and more strength than Lee. It was really pretty impressive what Lee was able to do with the amount of time and soldiers that he had. Would you ever have one house with 51 rats or 51 houses with a one rat? I think we all would know the answer to that one. Anyone who knows anything about American history knows Washington was a fraud and the real best president was FDR. About that, what makes FDR the best president? Unnecessarily interning hundreds of thousands of Japanese people, or economic policies that did not work or solve the Great Depression? Or is it not passing anti-lynching legislation? Or is it buddying up with the Soviets? I'm trying to figure out what makes FDR the best president. Certainly a great president, but not the best president. And if you want to learn more about the American presidents, I have a series of short videos on them. I have long-form videos on some of the best presidents, like Lincoln and FDR and Washington. And I have a tier ranking video where you can listen to and watch me rank every single president and explain exactly why I feel that way. He was disabled. He was working hard. He was an extremely great president. There's no doubt about it. He was 4 terms. He defied the natural order of things with the presidency and acted as a dictator and tried to pack the Supreme Court when they didn't approve all of his legislations. He certainly was extremely effective, extremely powerful, but extremely dictatorial. Good to see you, baby Bubba. Good to have you here. Top of the morning. 250 years, but 400 years worth of reparations. What say you? How about the 1,300 years of reparations that the Arabs deserved to the Africans? Do you ever talk about that? Do you ever care about how the Arabs owe? Does anyone ever ask the Saudi Arabians to pay reparations to Africa? Because 1,300 years of slavery is a lot longer than 400, last time I checked. You can't talk about disabled people that worked so hard where they got like that. FDR had polio. He developed it in the 1920s, and he hid it from the public extraordinarily well in order to boost the morale of the American people, knowing full well that he probably would never have gotten into political power or been able to make such a great political comeback and become president if he was openly disabled. Things would probably be different today. That's a controversial list. I can't see Taft being number 3. I think you're trolling at this point. Give me 1 second, please. I'll be right back. Please double tap the screen if you enjoy this, and we'll be going and answering your questions about history or social studies for the next hour or so. Okay. All right, we are back. Hello, bro. Please suggest to me which subject should I choose in Bachelors of Art. I would suggest history, but it all depends what your passion is. What do you want to learn about? What do you think is the most important to you? I would at least encourage you to do something in the social sciences as a minor. If you're not a history person, if you're not a humanities person, at least do something like that as a minor. When did Robert E. Lee order Pickett's charge when his leading generals, including Longstreet, was vehemently against it? Lee was riding high on his haunches. He was invading Pennsylvania. This is, of course, during the Battle of Gettysburg, which took place between July 1st and July 3rd of 1863. It's the most violent, bloody series of 3 days in American history, 50,000 casualties, the largest battle ever fought on American soil. And Lee again was riding high. He had invaded Pennsylvania and was hoping to force the North to surrender by winning the victory on Northern free soil, and was very, very close, actually. The Battle of Gettysburg is not a definitive Union victory. It is seen as a turning point because it pushed Lee back permanently into the South, but it was not originally like that. I think it was a power play. It's one of the very few mistakes Lee made as a general. William Howard Taft was a porker. Yeah, he was pretty big. He was a big guy. The idea that he got stuck in the White House bathtub, highly exaggerated. There's no evidence for that ever happening. Taft would sometimes need someone to help lift him out of the tub, but he was never stuck in it. That's a ridiculous. That's kind of a wild tabloid-like story made about Taft during his presidency. By all accounts, an extremely good man, an excellent judge, went on to be the only U.S. president to swear in another president as Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, swearing in Presidents Harding and Coolidge. He's a remarkable man. Or no, is it just Harding? Is it just Coolidge? Coolidge, I think he also swore in Herbert Hoover. But really just one of the better resumes of a U.S. president when you consider his non-presidential legacy, because presidents are judged what they do during and after their presidency. The reason Jimmy Carter has rebounded so much in the minds of many people is probably because of his work for Habitat for Humanity, because it sure as heck has nothing to do with how he handled Iran. Taft was a very reasonable, judicial, scholarly, constitutional man. And because of that, he was extraordinarily slow acting as president. He wasn't gung-ho to be president. He kind of fulfilled the wishes of both his wife and Theodore Roosevelt. And could have been a good president if he hadn't been required to follow everything that Theodore Roosevelt, wanted him to follow. And by the way, I try not to call him Teddy Roosevelt because he didn't like being called Teddy. What's your top 3 list of pharaohs of Egypt? Never thought about that one too much. Thutmose III, Ramesses II, and I'm trying to think who else I would select. Ptolemy the First, perhaps. Khufu is up there. Cleopatra obviously deserves an honorable mention for being such a powerful ruler, but there are actually many Egyptian pharaohs we know very little about. Akhenaten tried to force an entire religion for the Egyptians. That didn't go anywhere. So, who are the top 3 army generals of all time? Well, which army? Are you referring to the U.S. Army? Do you ever think about how the world would be more fair if men were allowed to be pregnant like women are? I just think it's unfair. I mean, I think you're just being a troll at this point. Um, let's see. Well, there were a lot of immigrants coming in during the time. That was the golden age of immigration when William Howard Taft was president. Um, so yeah. So anyways, what else do we want to talk about? What questions do we have about history or social studies? How would you write Woodrow Wilson as president? How would I write Woodrow Wilson as president? Like, how would I assess Woodrow Wilson? I think Wilson gets way too harsh. I think the reactions to Woodrow Wilson are way too polarized. There's not a fair, moderate historiography about Woodrow Wilson. For the longest time, historians would just overly glaze this president and make him out to be this incredible person that he really wasn't. Wilson was an extremely flawed man in many, many ways. Um, so, yeah, I don't see Woodrow Wilson as that great of a U.S. president. But at the same time, I think that there has been a pendulum swing in the opposite direction, especially by internet historians and armchair historians who just want to demonize every single thing he did. I don't think Wilson is a complete failure as U.S. president. I think he does some really good things. He obviously navigates the U.S. through a world war and does so successfully. The League of Nations would have been an extraordinarily successful operation had the U.S. joined like he wanted it to. He had the prescience to understand that a supranational organization was actually necessary to maintain peace globally with international empires. Wilson had a lot of good ideas, but it just never really worked out the way that he wanted it to, and didn't. Is there static again with this microphone? Can you all hear me okay? What else? Okay, hopefully the microphone is fixed now and you can all hear me all right. Yeah, Woodrow Wilson, not a terrible president, but not a very good one. Obviously had some really racist beliefs even for that day and age, where you can't just say he was a victim of his time and was just having problems because he was bound by the time and culture and the period in which he lived. He obviously had some really racist and retrograde views. So, what is happening with the static on this microphone? It's still static. Okay, can you hear me okay? Am I coming in clear? What's going on? Hello, can anyone hear me? Am I coming in clear? Is the static gone? Hopefully the static is gone. Anyways, we were talking about Woodrow Wilson. I think I answered the question. Do we have any other history or social studies questions that we can talk about, that we want to talk about? And hopefully, if you enjoy history and social studies and learning about American history and want to support us as we celebrate America's 250th, you can like and subscribe. Um, yeah. I don't know what happens. You know, the static issue, we had it yesterday. It's not the microphone, because the microphone's plugged in now. It's the internet. So it's one of those things where it chops out because of the internet, I guess, or something like that. So, yeah, sorry about that. Hopefully it's better now. I'm glad that it's gone now. I love this microphone. I think I was explaining yesterday. This is a Pyle microphone. It's kind of like that old 50s, 60s Edward R. Murrow kind of microphone, and I would hate to have to get rid of it because it's having problems. It doesn't have problems when I record videos. So thank you for bearing with me. What questions do we have? What history and social studies would we like to discuss? during the fourth of our four bonus Q&As. We normally do not broadcast at this time or during the week, but we chose to broadcast during the week, and everybody voted, and they voted for 12 Eastern. And so we've been broadcasting at 12 Eastern Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and today. And tomorrow we'll be back to our normal time. Saturday we'll be doing the 2-hour 250th Q&A special, and then Sunday we have our live stream lecture about the Declaration of Independence and America's founding. We also have been broadcasting. We broadcasted last weekend at our normal times, so we have been going since last Friday. So we are in the middle of, I think, 10 live streams in a row, and they've all been really wonderful, and we really appreciate it. Well, yeah, I don't mind that, but but I just get a nice clear sound out of this microphone. It's the best microphone I've had, so yeah. So what is the real story with the Alamo? Not that John Wayne made up BS. The Alamo was a mission. So missions were built by the Catholic Church throughout their colonies in order to proselytize the natives and produce certain raw materials and basically be a cultural center within a settlement or a town. And of course, the town of San Antonio, named after St. Anthony, blossomed and grew up around the mission of the Alamo. The Texas Revolution, which is, of course, an extremely good American history story, props up because of a large influx of settlers who were from America who lived in Mexico-owned Texas. Mexico had gained its independence from Spain in 1821, and basically, for the most part, had been very welcoming to settlers from American backgrounds to come into their areas and settle, as long as they said they were Catholic and would not try to overthrow the government of Mexico. Well, they tried to overthrow the government of Mexico because they thought they could run the area better. They also believed that the Mexican government was becoming more and more tyrannical, and seeing patterns that reminded them of the American Revolution, they began stockpiling arms. When the Mexican president/dictator Santa Anna de Lopez tried to seize and confiscate weapons being stockpiled by Texas revolutionaries, American Texans at Gonzales, Texas in 1835, the Texas Revolution was on, led by people like Stephen Austin and Sam Houston. It was a ragtag group that really was kind of a militia fighting against a much more well-organized Mexican army that consistently had the upper hand. And basically, while Houston was running around the territory of Texas trying to gather as much support and as many forces as he possibly could, the Americans were several American leaders, including Austin, Davy Crockett, who had been a politician who had went westward and helped fight in the Revolution, and Jim Bowie, the man who invented the Bowie knife and had been an explorer and pioneer, huddled together at the Alamo with slaves, as well as some women, and who were actually allowed to live afterwards, and basically decided to distract and divert the Mexican army while Houston gathered the forces that he needed to. So it is a sacrificial act. Basically, the Mexican army, which overwhelmed, outgunned, outmaneuvered, and outnumbered them, was laid siege to the mission and was eventually able to destroy all of the fighting men inside, and sending away the slaves and the women, basically to say, am I muted? Can you hear me? Why wouldn't you be able to hear me? Okay, we're back. I'm not touching the microphone right now, but can everybody hear me? Am I back? Is the audio coming in clear? Okay. I don't know why. I don't know what's happening with the internet. I have no idea. It might be an internet issue. Not sure. But basically, American settlers, I don't know what the last thing you heard me say was, but stockpile weapons for themselves. The Mexican government tried to seize those weapons. The Texas Revolution started. The Alamo is basically where the American forces set up fortifications. It was a mission in San Antonio. The army of Santa Anna de Lopez, the Mexican general, president, and dictator, surrounded them and laid siege. And basically, this was to buy time for other Texas revolutionaries like Sam Houston to gather enough forces and munitions in order to actually challenge the Mexican army. So, in many ways, it was going to be a loss. It was going to be a devastating defeat for the Americans. It did not have a chance. It was kind of a sacrifice in order to buy time for the other revolutionaries. The Americans held out for several days, and eventually all the fighting men inside were slaughtered, and some of the women and slaves were allowed to go free to report back to Houston what had happened. Houston gathered enough forces, and with cries of "Remember the Alamo," defeated the Mexicans at the Battle of San Jacinto, basically securing Texas its independence, and it would become its own republic for the next 9 years as the Americans debated the slavery issue of slavery expanding into Texas, and eventually in 1845, Texas became part of the United States. So there's a quick summary of the Texas Revolution, and not just the Texas Revolution, but the siege of the Alamo. So hopefully that clears it up. I don't know how much that is John Wayne's nonsensical ideas apparently surrounding it, but that is a good rendition of the Texas Revolution and the Battle of the Alamo. So what else? I'm looking at other questions. Is it true that Alexander the Great actually lost a battle in the Khyber Pass in Afghanistan? Yes, he did. He did lose a battle. He eventually conquered most of Afghanistan. It was India where he ran into trouble, and his forces eventually demanded that he return home with exhausted soldiers, overrun supply lines, an extremely strong Indian army, the Mauryan Empire. He was basically forced to return home. Who wrote National Anthem and who approved? Now that's going to be my American history. I'm doing a daily American history video series. So there's short videos every day from now until after the 4th about American history. That's going to be the one today, but basically it has its roots in this battle, in this war, not this battle, but the War of 1812. Francis Scott Key was a lawyer on a ship docked in the Chesapeake Bay, and he watched the Battle of Fort McHenry take place. And as the Battle of Fort McHenry took place, it was during the night the British bombarded the fort, and in the morning, to the surprise of everyone on the ship, when Key awoke, they saw that the American flag was still standing. They had not raised the white flag of surrender. The British had not bombarded the fort into surrender. The Americans had held their own and held off the British attack, and the cannons were quiet. So the Americans were able to hold off the British at Fort McHenry, which was a huge moral victory for the Americans who had been battered by the war for the most part. And so Key obviously wrote the lines that became a poem. And then eventually music was put to it, I think in the middle of the 19th century, and that became the Star-Spangled Banner. And in 1932, in the midst of the Great Depression, to raise national morale and pride, Herbert Hoover made the Star-Spangled Banner the national anthem of the United States. So despite being written being written by Francis Scott Key, that wasn't the final version with the lyrics that we know, and it wasn't even a song until the middle of that century, and it wasn't the national anthem until the 1930s. It's just like if you watch my most recent video on the Pledge of Allegiance, the Pledge of Allegiance wasn't written until the end of the 19th century and didn't become the national oath until the 1940s. There's a lot of these incredible cultural symbols and sayings and phrases and artifacts of our nation, of the United States, that do not actually become codified by the American government until late 19th and throughout the 20th century for various different reasons, to raise national awareness, patriotism, nationalism, to create a clear distinction between the United States and communism. Dwight Eisenhower adds the phrase "under God" to the Pledge of Allegiance and then adds "in God we trust" to the currency. These were motifs and themes that certainly were corroborative with the rest of American history, as America has been a generally Christian and religious nation for most of its history, but were codified by the Americans during their times of national struggle, be it the Depression or World War II, which I consider to be World War III, when the Pledge of Allegiance got its name and became the oath of the nation, or the phrases referring to God added to the currency and to the Pledge of Allegiance during the Cold War against the secular Soviet Union. So Francis Scott Key, and who approved. It was a long-standing history there. I will be doing a more in-depth video about it, Ringo, but a great question. I have a question. How do you know the history you know and share is not a distorted version of actual events made to fit a specific image of the present? That's a great question, Mose. There is definitely a level of faith that we put in our historical sources that we read. The debates that we have over history, the disagreements we have generally are not about the information that actually happened, the general facts. It's about secondary information. It is in the sense of our debates and interpretations of those events. Now, there's always this theory that the victors are write the narrative, so we can't trust anything that happens. That's nonsense, because you don't know who the victors are without knowing the history. So you have to learn the history to know that the victors write the history. You can't say the victors write the history without knowing history, if that makes sense. You also have to be open to the idea that of learning from primary sources, looking at archaeology, photographic evidence, paintings, writings, all sorts of different sources in order to inform your worldview. We have today a rising interest in history from the margins or history from below, which is the history written by groups of people that were often disenfranchised and not able to speak for themselves as they reflect upon those events and their interpretation of it. So you can get the perspective of a loser. You can get the perspective of a disenfranchised in history much more ably nowadays than you did before. In fact, a lot of historians, I think to a too far of a degree, want to get the perspective of the marginalized, or want to just put that out as if that perspective could ever be distorted, could never be distorted or ever be incorrect. It can be just as much as the victor's perspective can be, or the victor's perspective, the prevailing narrative, the original narratives. All those things can be distorted. So, I am not Israeli. I'm an American historian, but I'm also a historian of all different types. And if you want to join the channel's discussions, you can follow our Discord, you can read my articles on Substack, and you can also subscribe to the Patreon for bonus content. Can you guys hear me okay? Okay, anyways, you should be able to hear me. Oh yeah, it's Harry's birthday. So I guess on Saturday we're celebrating Harry's birthday. Harry is a British historian. Him and Hars are my great moderators, and they're taking care of the chat right now. And you can follow our social media and all of that stuff. Anyways, I shouldn't be breaking up anymore. Everything should be fine now. Okay, so what do we want to talk about? Whatever history do we have? What questions do we have about history, social studies, and the like? I'm born on the 4th of July. American as apple pie. I'm Yankee Doodle Dandy. Yankee do or die from Harlem. Well, the interesting thing is that American apple pie is actually Dutch apple pie, but the Dutch were in America even before the English, so I guess that's very American. Who got paid? What are you even talking about? Let me see. Why are we timing out people? He didn't deserve to get timed out for saying hello, Harry. Anyways, what questions do we have? What do we want to talk about with history or social studies? I don't want to reschedule your debate, Hars, and I don't appreciate you bringing that up when I'm trying to do a live stream. But how did allow the U.S. Army Air Corps to be caught on the ground and destroyed by the Japanese hours after they attacked Pearl Harbor? What are you referring to? What was caught on the ground and destroyed? You mean their military equipment? The American response at Pearl Harbor was slow, and it really showed that America was not expecting an attack by the Japanese. What happened to the Dutch East India Company? It eventually helped the Dutch colonize places like Indonesia, but lost in prominence as the British East India Company kind of outdid it. So the Dutch are very successful, very powerful during the 1600s, and that wanes heavily in the 1700s. They do not have the manpower, resources, or even eventually the navy, despite having a formidable mercantile empire and formidable navy in the 1600s, to continually compete with the French and the English. They have struggles during the various different wars, like the Anglo-Dutch Wars, and they eventually kind of fall off significantly and just kind of settle, having several different smaller colonies. Their obvious big colony, their largest investment becomes South Africa and the Boers and the Afrikaans language that develops out of that, and that is eventually swallowed up by British colonization. So the Dutch kind of lose a lot of their standing, including the Dutch East India Company, to the British, who have a larger force, a larger navy, and a larger empire. But good question, Tony. Oh, how did MacArthur allow the U.S. Army Air Corps to be caught on the ground and destroyed by the Japanese hours after they attacked Pearl Harbor? I don't think MacArthur is responsible for what happened at Pearl Harbor. Again, I think the Americans were caught completely unawares. What do you think about the conflict fought by the Commonwealth in Malaya, known as the Malayan Emergency? I don't know much about it, Harry, so I can't speak to it. All American culture comes from somewhere else. 90% of American towns and cities named after other places: New York, New Jersey. Yep, that's very good. So, except for your last thing, forget your past, become ignorant. No. Remember your past, become enlightened. The Dutch did have Indonesia. So the Dutch colonized Indonesia. They colonized several different other areas. Until I think the Japanese took Indonesia over during the last World War, what you call World War II. And then after the end of the war, the Indonesians declared independence under Sukarno. And then in 1949, the Dutch formally recognized their independence. I'm not trying to talk smug. This is just the way I talk. I'm not trying to sound arrogant. I'm not trying to sound like I know better. On the historical topic, I certainly know better than most, but that's only because I've dedicated my entire life to studying this. Thank you, Rebellion. I appreciate that. Are you able to talk to your chat as if you don't think you're so much better than everyone? You're just mad because I timed you out for being rude and inappropriate. So calm down off your high horse, Bojack, which is not a pun, and show some respect, be nice, like and subscribe, ask a question, and I'll answer in a friendly, neighborly manner. That's what I do. I really, really try not to be rude or confrontational or dismissive or condescending. I really, really don't. But people like you make it very hard not to be. Team Edward or Team Jacob? Werewolves are interesting. I get asked this all the time, and you'd think I have a good answer, especially as a historian, as someone who grew up in that period. How about Team Read a History Book? Your entire tone is condescending. Okay, let's see here. I think I can do a poll. Let's just see here. Aha. And by the way, yes means I'm condescending, no means I'm not condescending. I'm just doing this so that people like Bojack will be able to understand. Okay, there you go. We're going to start a poll. I've never done this on a live stream before, but it's fun. So yes, please vote. Am I condescending? We'll end the poll in just a couple of minutes. This is an educational stream. I'm answering all questions about history or social studies. So please answer the poll, like and subscribe, drop a topic, comment, or question. Good to see you, Shuriken. Long time. Long time. Looks like I tuned back in an interesting time. Yep, we're doing our bonus live streams for 4th of July. So we've been live streaming since June 26th, and we are live streaming bonus. We had bonus live streams yesterday, Tuesday, Monday, and today. And we'll be back to our normal broadcasting time Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. But Saturday's live stream will be a 2-hour Q&A exclusively about American history at 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So after the picnics, but before the parades, or after the parades, but before the picnics and the 4th of July fireworks, come and get all of your history questions answered, but it'll all be exclusively American history. Yeah, I got all my bots ready. They are just ready to go, these bots. Europeans called World War I and World War II. You called 7 years ago. Never heard that in my whole life. That's because they're wrong. I'm sorry, but they are wrong. There are 3 world wars, in my opinion. And I'm allowed to have that opinion. I've honed that opinion. I've developed that opinion. You can watch an entire video where I explain that opinion. So I'm glad you've been on a technological diet. I think a lot of people would benefit from being on a technological diet, but it's certainly great to have you here. Yep, good. Thank you, Save It for a Rainy Day. We're happy to have you aboard. And if you have a topic, question, or comment, you can drop it in the chat. Right now I'm doing a promotion where leading up to 4th of July, where if you subscribe, I will do a video about a particular topic so that you want. What was his name? Foxy or something? He wanted me to do Albert the 7th of Habsburgs, and I did that. My favorite era, late 19th and 20th century and 18th century European history with a special emphasis on Russia. That is my particular favorite era. But I love all different types of history of all different types of the world. European. So, in my opinion, and I've explained it in great detail, World War One is the 7 Years' War. World War Two would be the Great War, the war to end all wars, with the Kaiser and all that stuff. And then the Nazis and the Japanese are World War Three. So, if there's another World War, we're not going to World War Three. We're going to World War Four. That's my opinion. I could be wrong about that. There's no doubt about it. But but I don't think that I am. And I've stood by this opinion. People consider me arrogant, they consider me rude because I stand by the opinions that I hold. That's confidence. I have studied this. I have a lot of evidence on my side. I don't think you have the evidence to deny it, so you don't have an answer but to say I'm arrogant people will say, well, every historian, well, no, not every historian thinks that, by the way. And I think, and the job of the historian, especially if he studies for a master's or a PhD, is to come up with a new thesis or idea about the way the world works based off of the history, especially the primary sources that he or she analyzes. The Romanovs are my extended cousins. Oh, that's really cool. So you're Eastern European, Russian. I have some young Hyson tea here. This one was one of the teas dumped in Boston Harbor. I'm getting patriotic celebrations started early. Well, that's awesome. I didn't know. I did not know what the specific types of tea they used were. Yes, it is my history. This is a smoking jacket, based off of the smoking jacket was invented for British war officers coming back from the Ottoman War, the Crimean War in the 1850s, and they would get Turkish tobacco because they had helped the Turks out. So what would happen is they would smoke, and they didn't want to get it all over their clothes. So they would wear this, the officers. So it was proof you were an officer, you were a high-ranking soldier in the British Army during the Crimean War. You would wear this so you wouldn't get the Turkish tobacco all over your clothes. And I like to smoke. I like a pipe. I like a cigar. I'm getting a promotional. I subscribe to Cigars International, which is very good, by the way. They have great deals. And I got Mark Twain styled cigars. So they're based and inspired off of tobaccos and cigars that he smoked. And they have his label on it, and they threw in a bonus flask with Mark Twain's face on it. So I can't wait for that. It's supposed to come today. I'm very excited for that. So, but yes, this is my smoking jacket. It doesn't turn me into Hugh Hefner. It turns me into History Hefner. Who is the healthiest 80-year-old president in U.S. history? Thank you for the super chat, Jason. All the money that you give to the channel, whether you're a member like Jason is, which is why he has his own emoji and he gets early access and all sorts of great stuff, or from super chats, we use to improve the quality of the technology or what we are doing here. We're decorating the studio. We've got other things that we've got planned that are really, really fun. So we're really, really looking forward to it. Robert the Bruce and Stuart Kings, really cool. Thank you for sharing that, Judy. But yeah, who is the healthiest 80-year-old president in U.S. history? Well, Donald Trump just turned 80. Reagan was almost 80 when he left. There's only been two presidents who have been in their 80s when they were president, Biden and Trump. And by that metric, Trump wins. Not running away, but he definitely wins over the health of Joe Biden, who seemed to have serious complications with his mental acuity, so much so that he was removed from running for a second term and gave that up. But presidents that lived into their 80s, Jimmy Carter was extremely healthy at 80. He was still working for Habitat for Humanity. He won his Nobel Prize, I think, when he was 78 or 79. So there have been many examples of U.S. presidents who are very healthy into their 80s. John Adams lived to be 90 and was still writing letters with Thomas Jefferson. Jefferson started the University of Virginia, I think, when he was in his 80s. It all depends on their health and things like that. Nixon lived into his 80s. Gerald Ford lived to be 90. That would be a good video to make. The oldest presidents. Jimmy Carter obviously lived to be 100, so I think he wins. Ronald Reagan was 93. Gerald Ford was about 95. John Adams was 90. Some of these presidents have lived to be extraordinarily old. John Quincy Adams was 80 and still in Congress in 1848 when he had a stroke. But yeah, there are many different presidents who have shown to be very quite mentally strong and virile into their 80s. And I think probably Jimmy Carter wins because he was still doing his Habitat for Humanity work well into his 80s. In the 1800s USA, got a question about history or social studies? Drop it in the chat, and I'll be sure to answer as soon as possible. And please vote on the poll. Am I condescending? And 4 people have said yes, so I'm offended. In the 1800s USA, in your opinion, was a national bank or decentralized banking system better, and why? Jackson's destruction of a national bank in 1835, and this is a painting. It doesn't have him. He's kind of off to the side. of Andrew Jackson's victory at the Battle of New Orleans. So obviously, I'm a fan of some of Jackson's work, and obviously of this is we're kind of boosting and juicing American history because we're getting ready and leading up to the 250th birthday, including the daily shorts about American history, but also my most recent one about American immigration. But also, we're doing our Q&A on Saturday with a very special guest and 2 hours of U.S. history, and I want you to be there. I think that the U.S. centralized bank, the National Bank, had been a successful exploit. Jackson dismantling it caused the panics of 1837 and 1839 that really devastated the economy and ruined Martin Van Buren's term. Although the United States did get along without a centralized bank, thanks to James K. Polk, who kind of created a regionalized thing. So I think that's when the American economy really got going and growing. So although I've often felt that the national banks system created by Alexander Hamilton was really good and Jackson's destruction of it did a lot of damage to the American economy, there was an alternative option of decentralized banking that was probably better, that was instituted by your favorite president, Harsinet, James K. Polk. So do you remember when in Russia and East Germany, American products weren't allowed, such as Levi's blue jeans and certain music? Yes, they boycotted and banned American products. They did not teach, I've talked to people from the ex-Soviet Union who said they did not teach how the Americans won World War II, or what I call World War III. It was all about the Soviet Union defeating the Nazis. There's a lot of history they do not mention. There's a lot of stories they do not mention. There's a lot of culture they do not share. When American history ends 1970s, I don't know what you mean. More imperial bohia, which tastes quite similar to Lapsang Souchong, I think, was dumped more than any other kind, but they also threw out 15 chests of young Haesun. I'll have to look that up because that's going to be a great video. And Jason, again, thank you for the super chat. I really appreciate it, and I hope I gave you a good, thorough answer. If you want me to go in depth on a particular topic, especially one that's not historical, give me a super chat. It really, really helps me go into detail for you. From that hotel kitchen, is anybody still alive? What happened to them? Who was against American anthem and who got paid? What are you even talking about? Hotel kitchen. Which hotel are you referring to? You're going to have to be a little more specific, Ringo. Oh, good. Good to see you. Ding the Fox Boy. This is the guy who subscribed, and I did the video about Albert VII in his honor. So if you subscribe, this is a promotional we're doing right now. I will make a short video about a particular historical topic. This is something I did at the very beginning of the channel more than 2.5 years ago. And Harsinet, can you do a tech check for me? Am I coming in clear? Can you hear and see me all right? And hopefully you're voting on the poll, am I condescending? You missed some good history, some technical issues, but it's good to have you here. We'll be going for another 20 minutes or so answering all your questions about history and social studies. Hello, Jack. A good afternoon to you, too. It's 12:48 on the East Coast, and I will be answering your questions about history or social studies of all different types, preferably American, for the next 20 minutes or so. It's not because I don't know about any other type of history, but we're really getting ready and excited for America's 250th anniversary, which we'll be celebrating with a 2-hour Q&A on Saturday at 3 p.m. Eastern. Oh, you're talking about Robert F. Kennedy being killed by Sirhan Sirhan. Sirhan Sirhan says to this day he does not remember killing Robert F. Kennedy, which is extraordinarily convenient. I believe it was because of his position on Israel that he got killed. Obviously, Sirhan Sirhan was a political terrorist, and I think, did he just die or something just happened with him? Anyways, I might not talk much since most of my history I wanted to say were in the last two streams. Well, I'm so glad to have you here, and if you want to share it with the chat, you certainly can, and just sit back and enjoy the vibes. It's good to have you. And again, if you're enjoying this, please double tap the screen, like and subscribe. Check out all the long, short, and live-form content available for you 24/7 or 365 days a year. Well, did you know that Salmon P. Chase made the national banking system that went until 1913? Not just Alexander Hamilton. That's in play in 1800s American banking system history. I'll have to look into that because I didn't know. It's because of the greenbacks needed for the Civil War. Oh, so he created a monetary system that kind of served as the Federal Reserve for that time period. Interesting. Salmon P. Chase is fascinating because then he goes on to be a Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. And you can check out my series on the Supreme Court where I talk about all the different eras of the Supreme Court from John Jay until now. How was Queen Luluakalani, the Hawaiian queen, overthrown? It's a sad story. It's really a tragedy, and it's one of the blights on American history that we don't talk about enough. But Queen Luluakalani was from the ruling class of the Hawaiian kingdoms, the islands have been unified by King Kamehameha sometime in the 16th or 17th centuries, maybe even the 18th century. By the end of the 18th century, the Europeans were very well aware of it. They were the Sandwich Islands. This is where Captain Cook was murdered and his bones were preserved by the Hawaiian people. James Cook. Did I say Kirk? Now I'm thinking of Star Trek. Sorry. Anyways, so the Americans had had a presence on the island, but it grew exponentially during the latter part of the 19th century when the Americans' hope and interest in spreading their ideology and building international empires and colonies to rival the French and the British started to peak. So this is the same time Americans and and yellow journalism are promoting that the Americans colonized certain areas. They're promoting war with Spain to take over Puerto Rico and Cuba, which the Americans do. At the same time, in Hawaii, Sanford P. Dole, who, yes, Dole fruit is named after him. I believe so. I believe he has some sort of connection to that industry. But he basically moves to the islands along with several other rich businessmen to basically on the auspices of propping up the local economy by creating sugar plantations. The sugar plantations buy up a huge amount of land on the island, and Dole eventually finds himself the richest and most powerful person on the Hawaiian Islands over the Queen, and is basically able to maneuver it so that the only people who can vote for to create a democratization of Hawaii, so that the only people who can vote are the Americans, because the Americans are the ones who own all the land. It's a monopolization, and it basically, using his money and influence, he's able to get the Hawaiian people to overthrow her. I think that's what happens. And then by basically getting himself elected the leader of the territory, of the area, by the landholders being the only ones who are able to vote and them overwhelmingly supporting him, Dole then petitions President McKinley to annex to annex Hawaii, which he does in 1898, and that's how Hawaii becomes part of the United States. It's a tragedy. The native rule of the Hawaiian people was completely ignored. They were horribly oppressed by Dole and his other cronies. And they basically bought up all the land, disenfranchised the Hawaiians, and then of course, made their own determination to join the United States. They rigged the election by owning all of the land, and that eventually led to the U.S. acquiring Hawaii. The Hawaiians were not compensated for this. The Hawaiians were not treated well for this. It's a terrible chapter, and we don't talk about it nearly enough. And I see the super chat, so I'm going to go to that first. CSR, thank you so much for your membership and for the super chat. The creation of the Federalist Society. The Powell Memo. No, I don't know what the Powell Memo is. The Federalist Society is a right-wing think tank for legal jurists, and it has helped promote conservative judges to be appointed to the district and appellate and, of course, the Supreme Court. Something that you don't know about, probably, or you may not know about, is that the American judiciary system is created and acts in the vein of Congress. This Judiciary Act of 1790 makes this very clear. And the Supreme Court is the court we always think about, but when you hear about a federal judge has blocked Donald Trump's blah, 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 it is the district or appellate courts. So I believe it's the district courts. America is actually divided up into jurisdictions for judges, and I believe the district courts are the most, and then the appellate is higher, and then the Supreme Court is above that. So if you have a federal case, it doesn't immediately go to the Supreme Court for them to hear it. It is heard by districts and then appellates and then so on. And of course, you can go through state courts. That's why states have Supreme Courts and things like that. They also have district and appellate courts. So some of the states, like California is a good example of this, works similar to how their three branches of government are mirrored, with the governor, like the president. They have two chambers of Congress in their legislature, and they have a district appellate and, of course, state Supreme Court. So I don't know, but so the Federalist Society, if I have the correct one, is a right-wing think tank that promotes right-wing conservative originalist jurists to become judges on the different courts, especially the Supreme Court. Originalism is the philosophy by people like Antonin Scalia or Clarence Thomas that basically says the Constitution should only be interpreted based off its original intent and the context in which it was written. So this will take us to the birthright citizenship thing. So the birthright citizenship thing, Justice Thomas dissented, saying basically that the intention of the original law was to apply to slaves who were given their citizenship after the end of the Civil War. And then it was extended through Juan K. Mark to expand to immigrants. But basically, this never was it intended in the mind of the men who wrote it and made it law that the 14th Amendment would apply to children of illegal aliens born in this country, or children of visitors born in this country, or things like that, or children of refugees, or temporary residents. That the people who wrote the 14th Amendment did not originally intend for that to apply to them. So it's completely unconscionable to to keep birthright citizenship on those grounds. That would be the dissenting opinion. Now, the majority decision, which originalist justices Barrett, Kavanaugh, and Roberts, they're considered to be more originalists. Those are the conservatives on the court. Joined in is along with the living document judges, Kagan, Sotomayor, and Jackson, who are considered to be the liberal ones. The living document basically says the Constitution was written in the 18th century and the amendments were added in the 19th and 20th centuries, but America has changed significantly since then, so it actually makes more sense over time that the interpretation of the American Constitution changes because of the context in which we live. So that is Justice as Breyer, or no, Ginsburg and Scalia were best friends and constantly debated this. And I think Justice Breyer and Justice Kennedy also debated this. This is a long-standing debate within the Supreme Court of how to interpret it. So the Federalists, I don't know about the Powell memo, so I'm sorry, I can't help you there at CSR. But the originalism interpretation has given justices, has been the bulwark for conservative justices. Living document has given leeway for interpretations in different contexts. The Obergefell decision is a great example of this, with the basically allowing gay marriage to overturning any ban on gay marriage. The Dobbs decision, the originalist judges would argue that there is no right to abortion enshrined in the Constitution. The founders never intended or thought of anything regarding abortion, neither did the 14th Amendment, which was appealed to in the original decision of Roe v. Wade. So because of that, despite Roe v. Wade being a precedent, the Constitution is greater than the precedent. So therefore, the Constitution doesn't really say anything or have anything to do with abortion, so abortion is not protected by the Constitution, so that's why they voted to overturn Roe v. Wade. So there's an explanation there. I'm not saying one is better or the other. I'm explaining how it works, and I hope you appreciate that. That's the best I can do, CSR. I'll have to look into what the Powell memo is, but thank you for bringing that up with me. I'm going to try to catch up to the chat. I will try to answer your questions as soon as possible, and I really appreciate all the finances to help the channel. How it basically worked was, since local banks printed their own money, forgeries and Worth made them useless. Chase issued green banks pegged by no gold. Then when banks wanted to use considered a national bank, they'd have to buy a large load of federal bonds with their gold. Oh, interesting. So it was a way to buy federal debt. So this new national bank got a bunch of gold, and those federal banks, those small banks, bought to be considered national banks, are kept secure as collateral in the U.S. Treasury. That's kind of what Hamilton did, so it's kind of a revamped version of what Hamilton did, and it makes a lot of sense to do that in wartime when you need capital. We enjoy your channel, and you don't need to hear from horse's mouth if you touch in Hawaii. Captain James Cook, can you bring him a little closer? You mean talk about him more? Fascinating guy. Obviously, is one of the first Brits to thoroughly explore Polynesia as well as Australia. Really kind of sets the British off, although the British already knew about Australia and had already arrived in Australia, as had the Dutch were the first to get there in the 17th century. And of course, the Aborigines thousands of years before that. But Cook is the one who claims what becomes Botany Bay for the British. I think Botany Bay is the first colony in Australia. Interesting. This was so the federal government could make a national banknote, and this system forced banks across the country to adopt the national dollar. It's interesting. It is interesting how that worked, and eventually you get the Federal Reserve, which a lot of people hate today, but understand that the national banks of the 19th century aren't that different. The Hawaiian Queen wrote a book and journal while the Americans imprisoned her in her own palace. Yep, they basically said, oh, that's nice. You think you have a right to rule over your people. You're inferior. And the basis for that was what Dole did to Luluakalani comes heavily from the idea that of paternalism and social Darwinism. And the way paternalism and social Darwinism basically works is the people of this area the natives of this region have not properly developed an organized civilization the way we have. And because they have not done this, they are inferior. They have proven themselves not to be as good or as thoughtful or as creative or as innovative as we are. They do not have the mechanisms of industry. They do not have capital. They do not have proper education. This was huge during the late 19th century, and it justified the Europeans' and Americans' colonization of many different places and the oppression of the people therein because they believed they were savages who could not rule over themselves, so they had to be taught how to rule over themselves by an external force, i.e. the British, French, and American empires. Yankee Doodle went to town. I did a video on that just recently, or I revamped a video I did on that just recently. Here's the thing. Everyone regretted executing Socrates. Athens just got out of a major war and relentless questioning of authority. His reputation and his ties to controversial figures made him bad. Yep. And Plato made them pay. He reminded them of how bad they actually were. So I was watching many videos on the Somme earlier, since it's the 110-year anniversary of the start of the Battle of the Somme. I was watching the Doughboys' introduction into the conflict in 1917. Yep, the Doughboys, called Doughboys because obviously sandbags were used to reinforce trenches and for cover, and so because of that, they were called doughboys, like they were carrying bags of dough. And those are the American, believe the American GIs during that conflict. Yes, if I'm correct. It's really fascinating. I need to do a video on the Somme. I do have a video on World War I, or World War II, whatever you want to call it. Hearts, can you put in the video to World War I or World War II? And since we've been talking about presidents a lot, can you put in my presidential tier ranking videos? Please go check those out when you have the chance. I'm not I really do not believe that I am condescending. I try not to be. There are times where people make it extraordinarily hard not to be, and if I have ever been condescending to you, I apologize. It's not my intention to come off that way. When someone is repeatedly rude to me on the channel, when somebody is repeatedly disrespectful and repeatedly unkind, it becomes harder for me not to respond to them in that way. Especially when they are defiantly refusing to learn anything. They are shoving their fingers in their ear, repeating narratives, and trying to distract everybody from the history that we're talking about. And I think it would be condescending to limit their voices and shut them down. And my moderators ask me to do it all the time. And sometimes I acquiesce, especially if they're too belligerent or they're extraordinarily disrespectful or vulgar. But oftentimes it's just, no, you don't know what a historian is. That's the thing we came up with the other day. I defy anyone. I think it would be very hard not to be condescending. So I don't think the question is friendly history condescending? The question should be, why isn't he significantly more condescending given the context? But if I come off as condescending to you, I apologize. That is generally not my attitude and not my desire. I was interested in the fact that doughboys needed over 3 months of training before their bloody entry into the war. Yes, the American army was completely unfit to join the war. It was a surprise that they did join the war, and they had John Blackjack Pershing, who's one of the greatest generals in American history, ready there. Oh, somebody asked the top 3 generals earlier. I think it was Solomon. I hope Solomon's still here. In American history, Pershing is definitely one of them. Lee and Patton. Eisenhower would be up there. Eisenhower never saw a day of combat. And Zachary Taylor deserves a shout out, and Winfield Scott deserves a shout out, and Stonewall Jackson, and Ulysses S. Grant. You know what? Grant is one of the top 3. Grant, it's hard for me to pick because I know I'm thinking about all the different conflicts, and Grant was really, really good. Can you please explain the significance of the Mayflower Compact? It was an agreement made by the men of the Pilgrims, the separatists, of 155 people who eventually settled at Plymouth Rock, and on the Mayflower, they wrote a governmental contract for how they would run their new colony. And it was basically this idea of mutual respect, following God's ordinances. They were good Calvinist Puritans, so they obviously believed in doing that. It was all based in their own ideas based in their ideas of following God's laws, thanking Him for giving them this land, and working mutually for the benefit and success of one another. And the reason it's a significant document, I probably should do a deeper video about it, maybe even do a reading of it, because I've done readings of historical documents on the channel before, you know what, that would be a good video for tomorrow. Saturday I'm re-uploading my video on the Declaration of Independence where I read the Declaration and explain it, so please check that out when you get the chance. But, yeah, the significance of the Mayflower Compact really comes down to the words of a Mayflower Compact being one of the first governing documents made by American colonists, British American colonists. Where did the Supreme Court get the idea of legal immunity for the president while conducting official duties? So the United States, it's obviously a complex thing. but it operates under this paralegal idea that the president, as the commander in chief, will make military decisions that can sometimes be considered murder. And because of that, there are spaces in which the president operates just like most of the intelligence community and the military apparatus, that are morally ambiguous and shady, to be frank. So the American president operates in that as the commander in chief and the head of the executive department, the executive branch. So he has to actually intervene in those instances from time to time. So he has to have some sort of failsafe that if he does operate in those instances, he is not going to be held liable unless it's proven that it was unnecessary. That's the best explanation I can give. The Supreme Court did not give Donald Trump immunity to do whatever he wanted, nor did it give any other president immunity to do whatever he for now, wanted. What it does is it says there are sections of the presidential role that can be more morally ambiguous than others, and therefore the president should be allowed to operate with impunity in those areas unless it is proven that he could have done otherwise. Have you ever bought a federal bond? Would you recommend buying bonds or just invest? I invest in the market. You make more money. Federal bonds are good, but you're obviously buying into the U.S. dollar, and inflation being what it is, obviously you won't lose any money. You'll get your money back and you'll make a little bit of money, but it's a slow investment, low risk, low reward. I do like talking about economics, both macro and micro, so thank you for bringing that up. Did he do a video on Pope Francis? I've done several videos. I did one when he died, and I did videos on Pope Leo. Obviously, being the first American pope is quite historical. And Bergoglio was the first South American pope. And there's the Great War and Friendly Histories presidential tier list video. Did Obama really go to many African countries to force them to accept the gay movement or take away U.S. aid, and they rejected his ideas? Yes. Uganda is a great example of that. But we try to remove people that would get to a point where you have to be condescending, and then we get told off. Now, that's not true, Harry. There are times where removing someone who is being, like you remove somebody for saying hey today. That's not acceptable. I know you Brits are the people of 1984. I know you're in Oceania. I get that. But people don't deserve to get removed just because they disagree with me. If would rather bad ideas get exposed and destroyed because I'm a free speech absolutist. Now, if somebody is constantly making vulgarity, constantly saying disgusting things, constantly trying to just destroy the chat, that's an acceptable grounds. And sometimes they're doing both. But if a person is just showing how ignorant and stupid their position is, I'd rather that people see that. I really would, because usually I'm hammering it away, or people in the chat are hammering it away. Robert E. Lee is not American? Yeah, he is. Robert E. Lee is totally an American. This is where we get into a really messy area with the Civil War. So Robert E. Lee, first of all, was an excellent general in the Mexican-American War and the Indian Wars before then. So he was an extremely well-established officer. That's why Lincoln went to him and asked him to lead the Army of the Potomac. If he had, the war would have been over by the summer. But Lee, so this is a sticky situation. When we talk about 600 or 700,000 casualties for the Civil War, we're talking about both Confederate and Northern. And that's because the Confederate States of America, while being a rebellious country that cannot be considered American in that regard, were made of ethnic American people. The people in that country were Americans. And so their victims, their casualties, are American casualties. Robert E. Lee is an American general, whether he's fighting for the North or the South. He is just fighting for a rebellious country. It's a nuanced perspective. You have to acknowledge that the Confederate States of America was a foreign country that was destroyed by the United States and then reinculcated into the United States. But you also have to realize that the ethnicity of the people of the Confederate States of America was not Canadian. They were Americans. Andrew Jackson's a pretty great general. You're on my racist radar if you think Lee was a good or great American. He was a traitor. I didn't say he was a good or great American. I said he was a great general. One of the greatest generals in American history. And I think Lee gets too hard of a reputation for joining with the Confederates. I think he joined the losing cause. But we talked about this yesterday. Maybe you weren't here, Hars. But if you think about it clearly, Lee chose state loyalty over national loyalty. Lee had almost the exact same perspective on slavery as Lincoln. He didn't like slavery. He had some slaves because of his wife, just like Ulysses S. Grant had slaves because of his wife. Yes, Ulysses S. Grant, the Northern general who won the Civil War and became president on a radical Republican civil rights agenda, who destroyed the Ku Klux Klan, owned slaves. If you didn't know that, it's kind of fascinating. Robert E. Lee believed that the issue of slavery was complex. He did not morally approve of slavery, but he sided with his state over his country, which was a mistake. It was wrong. He is considered a traitor because he was a Confederate. But the Confederate traitors were dealt with slaps on the wrist, thanks to Andrew Johnson. But I don't think that Robert E. Lee deserved to be hung. I really don't. I think that Lee, it was a losing ideology. It was the wrong ideology. People fight in wars for all different forms of reasons, and his reason was not to protect slavery. His reason was to protect Virginia. And if you don't think that state loyalties over federal loyalties and localism, the idea that your local area is better than the larger general area, even if you support the larger general area. For instance, most Americans will root for America against Belgium next Monday during the World Cup. But that doesn't mean that you think that if you live in San Francisco, that Los Angeles is better than you, or that Nevada is better than California. Localism and regionalism are things that are extraordinarily profound all throughout the history of any civilization, especially in the United States, because it's a conglomeration of states that are united, literally. And if you don't think that people will fight, today, if there was a civil war, would fight for their state, would choose their state over their government, then look at the LA riots last year. Look at all the people standing up to ICE. Those people were doing what they believed was right, standing up for their state over and against a federal authority that they thought was tyrannical or oppressive. Robert E. Lee wasn't doing much different. He didn't believe that the American government was oppressive, but he rather would side with his state than with his nation, and that is something that a lot of people would do today. Also, when we time someone out or hide them, it removes all comments, so if you're behind, we are probably not removing for the reason you see, for what they... No, that guy made one comment and he got removed. He did not deserve to be removed. Andrew Jackson is actually a very good American military general. He single-handedly dominated the South in Georgia and Alabama in the War of 1812 and New Orleans at the end. Yep, helped to skip Florida. Great general, no doubt about it. The circumstances of General Patton, do we know today a little more? I don't know what you mean. Like how he died? No, Patton was not assassinated. His victory at the Battle of New Orleans was pointless, literally pointless. Yes, it is completely pointless to defeat a much larger army of 10,000 Brits. He had no idea. That is such an ignorant comment, Harry. I'm sorry. But you make this all the time. Well, the war was already over. I said that earlier, by the way. Yeah, just because the war was over, they had no idea the war was over. For their money, the war was still going on. So what are you supposed to do? Nothing? You're supposed to continue in the knowledge that you have. So at the end, it ended up being kind of ironically pointless. You're right about that. But it is a significant victory. It's one of the moral victories of the War of 1812 that helped inspire American patriotism, which is extremely important going forward because the 19th century is a century of American patriotism, except for the Civil War. And it makes Andrew Jackson a national hero, and he never would have become president. There would have been no Jacksonian era. There'd be no Democratic Party without that victory. So it's not pointless. It's just pointless in the terms of how did it impact the war. It's not pointless in the terms of inspiring Americans, and it's certainly not pointless in making Andrew Jackson a national hero and eventually a president. I don't think Jackson would have ever become president had he not won at New Orleans. That's what led him to conquering Florida. That's what led him to fighting the Indians. Well, he'd already been fighting them for a long time, but that's what put Jackson on the map. So it's not pointless. It's pointless in the terms of how did it impact the War of 1812, but a small force of about 500 Americans defeating 10,000 Brits is an extreme, or it was about 1,000 Americans, defeating an army 10 times their size is an extremely impressive victory, even if the fighting has already stopped. Winfield Scott, yeah, Scott's a pretty great one. We don't talk about him enough. Patton, those are good ones. And Ulysses S. Grant, that's another great one. Those are not bad choices. Although Scott's actions in the Civil War were pretty pointless and bad. So Scott hurts himself with that. Let me see. Didn't General Blackjack Pershing have problems with Pancho Villa? Yep. Pancho Villa was raiding the southwest of the United States. There was real fear that Mexico would join with Germany and invade and try to get back the southwest in California. That's what the Zimmerman telegram was, and that led to the United States joining the war. Yeah. With bonds, you don't pay taxes on the interest. That's true, too. Do you think a video on Louise Marie Adelaide de Bourbon will come out before or after July 4th? Do you want me to do a video on her? I've already done one for Albert VII, but you know what? I will, because I don't know who she is, so I like learning about someone new, so I will. Um, I see the argument a lot where the 7 Years' War was considered the first global war. If you had to argue that it wasn't the first global conflict, what would you say? How would I argue a devil's advocate? I would stick to it's hard. I think I've made a pretty rock hard case. But my moderators don't think that. A lot of people don't think that. And the reason they don't think that is, I think, a traditional historical lens of looking at, oh, a world war has to be the First World War. There are two good arguments, actually, that come to mind. One, Asia is not really involved. You don't have China and Japan like you do in both world wars in the 20th century. So you don't have that presence. But you do have fighting in India, which is in Asia. You also don't have the large scale total war investment of the entire civilization and society that you see in both world wars. You don't have the propaganda as much. Propaganda is created through the political cartoons of the British that lampoon Napoleon during the Napoleonic Wars, which come about 60 years after this. You don't have the large scale industrial apparatus that creates huge, nasty killing machines, and also the ability to communicate very quickly through telegraph, telephone, and later even radio about the military, about what is happening during the war, like it was in the two world wars. So you don't have the technology for communication, you don't have the mass amount of casualties, you don't have the devastation as much, you don't have the environmental impact. So there is that as well. But so those are two arguments. You don't have the mass amount, but you also, that's just the case for anything at that time, because obviously you don't have the mass widespread amount of technology for anything back then compared to the 20th century, because you haven't had the Industrial Revolution yet. So it's not the 7 Years' War's fault that it's a war fought it's a pre-industrial war. If you make it proportional, it has every single one of those things. It definitely has a huge impact. It definitely has a lot of calamity. It definitely is the technology of that time period being used to devastate and destroy large numbers of people. But I think those are the two best arguments. You don't have the widespread oomph factor that you have with the technology and communication and wholesale investment from propaganda to rationing that you see in both world wars in the 20th century on both sides. That's a fair point. And the other fair point is you don't see East Asia. You do have Africa. You do have Spain and Portugal bringing their new world areas in late in the conflict. You obviously have fighting in North America, what we call the French Indian War. In fact, if you look at World War III or World War II, the Sino-Japanese War, the Second Sino-Japanese War, starts in 1937. And for me, another hot take, that's when the real World War, when World War III or World War II, whatever you want to call it, let's just call it World War II for argument, really starts, is the Second Sino-Japanese War, the Marco Polo Bridge incident in 1937, not 1939. But you have that war is a subset of the last World War, World War II, the war between the Chinese and the Japanese, and that includes horrors like what happened at Nanjing. It includes basically a boon given to the communists that will allow them to take over China later. It's a fascinating war, but it is part, as is the Ethiopian War of 1935, which is another potential start date for the war. Those wars are subset wars of the larger conflict because they're going on during that conflict. The French Indian War would be the example for the 7 Years' War. It starts 2 years before and includes obviously fighting amongst an empire, its colonies, versus another empire and its colonies and its native allies. No difference. Absolutely the same as the fighting you see during the Great War. Let me see here. I'm sorry, I've been going on about that, but I really love that topic, so hope you enjoyed that. That was a freebie. Robert Lee did not do as much as Douglas MacArthur, George S. Patton, Ulysses S. Grant, or even George Washington in his short tenure in the Mexican-American War before he pulled a Benedict Arnold. He's not a Benedict Arnold. It is not a fair comparison to compare Robert E. Lee to a man who fights for his state over his country to a man who fights for another country versus his country. And yeah, Lee did a lot of great stuff in the Mexican-American War and did even more great stuff in the Civil War. It's from a military historical standpoint, Lee is an impressive general. There's no doubt about it. I think the first Hawaiian king Kamehameha was ruling the islands at the same time as George Washington. So late 1700s. Thank you for that, Fidel. MacArthur is not overrated. MacArthur was a great general. But some of these generals exist purely on their aura, their arrogance, their pride, their ego, their persona. MacArthur is one of those generals. He's a great American general. There's no doubt about it. And of course, the Brit is complaining about MacArthur, but doesn't realize that the Japanese wouldn't have been defeated without MacArthur, which means the Indians, the British colonies in India and Burma would have continued to suffer without MacArthur. But who cares about that? But MacArthur is not a bad general, but there is a level to which the aura and persona of MacArthur overwhelms what he was as a general. The Incheon landing is one of the most brilliant strategies ever used in the 20th century. No, again, Robert E. Lee is an American. He's an American thoroughly. And he did it, and yeah, he joined another nation that was also an American nation. So there's a difficulty there. That would be what separates him from Arnold. It's not easy, but I do see Robert E. Lee as an American general. So how can Lee, the man who was barely in American history for his military tenure, be the best military leader over pure Americans? I wouldn't say that he was the best American general. I say he's one of the best American generals. From a purely military standpoint, from a purely technical standpoint, Robert E. Lee is one of the best American generals. I don't know that he's the best. Grant, Patton, there's some that might be better. Okay, what's going on? Did you just call the CSA an American country? You've lost all credibility. See, it's stuff like that makes... See, people wonder, why is he condescending? It's nonsense like that from moderators. I never said the CSA is an okay, what I mean by American is they are made of Americans. They are ethnically American. I am distinguishing between ethnic status and the rebellion against the United States of America. So, anyways, let me see here. Harry agrees with me, so thank you, Harry. Winfield Scott was pointless in the Civil War. He created the exact plan that won the U.S. the war, and Grant took the Mississippi River because of his plan. Winfield Scott rallied 75 troops in 1861. Okay, why wasn't he the general at the end of the war? He was unable to ride into combat at Manassas because he was too fat to sit on his horse. Winfield Scott was long in the mouth by that time. I'm not saying he wasn't a great American general. I'm saying that Lincoln, as is well documented, struggled with Scott, with Fremont, with McClellan. Some of these generals were extremely well-known people and extremely good war generals. Fremont and McClellan and Scott had all proved themselves in previous conflicts. They did not prove themselves to Lincoln. He went through one general after another. Ambrose Burnside gave us the sideburns, but he didn't give the Union enough victories. Let me see. Why is the former FBI director J. Edgar Hoover so controversial? Wiretapping, manipulation, fraud, the fact that he was a PDF file, and all sorts of other stuff. Basically, all of his tactics were, like COUNTERPRO is a good example of this. The infiltration of leftist groups by FBI agitators to get them to agitate so that they could destroy leftist ideology in America. Is a great example of that during the 50s and 60s. So yeah, Hoover used dirty tactics to get his results. He basically acted like a mafia boss as the leader of the FBI and destroyed people's lives in doing so. When the Confederate States of America sent their Declaration of Causes to Washington, D.C., they openly rebelled from the United States and can no longer be considered American. Except in the terms of ethnicity that I have already stipulated. Daniel Boone, the Appalachian Trail, Cumberland Gap, basically was the first trailblazer, was the first pioneer in American history. So, the cases you just mentioned, they weren't supporting military actions against their own state, against their own government. Yeah. This guy has no history or education behind him, literally just a YouTube fake professor, and any debate, this guy will get crushed. That's amazing. I love how people say that, then they don't give me an actual debate. They don't give me any evidence. They don't fact check me. They just say extremely rude things. Like, that's an extremely rude thing to say. Like, if I went into a history channel and I didn't like the way the historian was presenting information, I would find a way to contact him separately, like maybe on his Discord, which is pinned in the chat, and say, oh, you're really not doing this right. I wouldn't even message his group. I'd message him directly and say, this is the way you should be doing it. You could do it that way. That's how I'd like feedback. I would be very open to people doing that. I've been very generous with this channel because I'm not a dictator. I'm an American, so I'm not a dictator, in allowing people to share their ideas without the fear of getting canceled immediately. People take advantage of that, my beneficence, because they want to score points by basically saying this person's an idiot, this person's that, this and that, and they never actually provide anything. Why haven't you thought of making a video ranking history events? That would be a good one to make. Thank you, Ding the Foxboy. I appreciate that. That's a good suggestion. And what's on top of drain base as it used for something? I don't even know what you mean by that. Yeah, industrialism. If you could live in any decade, which one would it be? I would go back to the 19th century. Interesting. I don't know about Albert Sidney Johnston. I know about Joseph E. Johnston, another great general. Didn't Washington gain his wealth, plantation, and slaves the old-fashioned way? He married it? Yes, his wife was the one who owned that. That's fair. I like that, Welch. That's a good interpretation of when World War II or World War III started. Yes. I'm saying that Lee is completely different than Benedict Arnold. There is a difference between fighting for the British in the American Revolution and fighting for the CSA in the South. Who took over Berlin in 1945? It was divided between the British, French, and Americans in the West, as well as the Soviets in the East. The Soviets were the first ones to get there, and they tried to prevent the Americans from having any say, any control over Berlin. But eventually it was administered by the Allies into different zones and eventually was divided as the capital despite being squarely in East Germany. And the Soviets used many tactics such as building the Berlin Wall to try to pressure the West Berlin side to become part of the Soviet Union so they could control all of Germany's historic capital. Good question, Michael. Ethnicity doesn't matter. We are talking about countries, not ethnicities. Okay, you've established what we're talking about. I am talking about ethnically American generals and where they rank. I'm talking about ethnically American generals, and you can only really think of two of them, Benedict Arnold being one and Robert E. Lee being the other, and Benedict Arnold and Robert E. Lee are not comparable. I am holding you back a grade. You have to redo history class. What is it now? See, this is what I mean, and people think this is condescending. You come into the chat, you see someone who's being rude, you see me responding to someone out of frustration because the person is adamantly over and over again doing the mule from Family Guy. Nope, Kevin Bacon wasn't in Footloose. You lose. Well, it was well established. He was nope. And then eventually they start kicking over the table. They act with no class. They show no appreciation. They have no respect for the channel. They have no respect for what I do. They don't even try to lightly or blithely be like, you know what, actually this isn't true. Even my own moderators get like this. And then I say something to them and I'm like, that's extraordinarily rude. Or I just call them out. I say, how? What do I not know? Why do I have to redo history class? I deal with this all the time and I get called condescending for it. Yes, I'm not saying Winfield Scott is a bad general. I am saying in the Civil War, he was not a great general. He was not the same general he had been. And Lincoln should never have appointed him the general. And Lincoln dismissed him for it. Who would you say was the best general at the side of the Union, just militarily speaking? Grant, if not Sherman. Did Abraham Lincoln carry around a pistol during his presidency? I think he did. Normandy amphibian landings. Well, you've got paratroopers landing there. What do you mean by amphibious landings? You mean just the troop transports? Or are you talking about men coming swimming to the ground, to the beaches, which both of those happen? Did the CIA take care of JFK, mainly LBJ? I gave an entire live stream lecture on this, Michael, but in my perspective, I don't think Oswald killed Kennedy. And I think that's at this point, there's no conspiracy theories around JFK because all those theories make a lot of sense. I think that it's very likely that some sort of apparatus had something to do with Kennedy's death. Hello, Faraz. Good to see you. With a very edgy comment to troll, but my heart says that would make friendly history mad, and it's not a good thing to do to a friend. Which one should I listen to? I won't be mad at a super chat. Are you familiar with Cult of Mithras? Yes, I know who Mithras is. Confederate Western Theater. Why did Jefferson Davis promote drug-induced John Bell Hood to General of Tennessee, who got the Confederate slaughtered at the Battle of Franklin? I don't know why he promoted him. Lincoln and Jefferson Davis both made mistakes in their military command. You had to shift the goalpost when I asked you who was the greatest American to who was the best ethnically American general, just for some weird question to call Robert E. Lee. No, I'm saying no. 9999. No. What I am saying is the parameters for which I judge include that person being ethnically an American general, and so Robert E. Lee still fits that. He served as an American during an American conflict, then fought as a Confederate against the United States of America. In fact, by the way, just for the record, I'm one of the very few historians who calls the Confederate States of America another country. A lot of historians, especially armchair historians, especially popular historians, make the Confederates are the same. No, they are not. They are a foreign country that was defeated by the United States. A lot of historians, particularly on the right, make that ridiculous claim that the Confederate. So I'm going along with this based off of my own definitions of an American general, which include his ethnicity. So that I'm not shifting the goalposts. That's just part of my consideration. Let me see. Because in history you have a narrative and you just have to push that as much as possible. You go against a lot of logic and a lot of cohesive talking just to make your narrative seem good. No, explaining my narrative, explaining the reasoning for my narrative is not me going against logic. It's explaining the logic. How come Japanese missed gasoline tanks in Hawaii? Big white tanks, how is that possible? I don't know. Who were Freemasons? And how much truth are in their conspiracy theories? Probably not much. The Freemasons were a secret society full of rich and powerful people. Started in the 17th century, I believe, that became popular and still exists in some. It's a fraternal / cultic / religious group / community group that usually does some sort of communal work, including to this day. The Shriners, I think, are a derivative of them. But Masonic lodges still exist in the United States and in Britain. They were created in Europe, spread to the United States. Some of the founding fathers were Masons, and they were secret groups and societies where they would do secret and sacred rituals. But they would also invest in their community. I think it was a way for politically powerful people. There always has been a way for politically powerful people to meet and discuss things secretly that they would not want publicly displayed or disclosed. I don't know who Mithra is. The cult of Mithra is this belief. I'm trying to think of which deity, which civilization it comes from. All I know is that there are people and theorists who believe that Jesus in his story is based on Mithra because Mithra is a virgin-born god deity who was born on December 25th. So there are people who believe that Jesus is based off of an earlier deity, I think from Mesopotamia, named Mithra. Osiris is another one, yeah. Horus, sorry. Your narrative is unique reasoning for popular things. That's why you have to have special views on things like the First World War, that James K. Polk is a very good president. I'm sorry. Most people believe that James K. Polk is a very good president. I'm allowed to have unique perspectives. Every historian has unique perspectives. And I'm going to end this poll, and thank you all for voting. I appreciate that, because I'm going to start another one. And that poll, before we get done, and we're going over, and I know that, is James K. Polk a good president? Yes, no, and then IDK. We'll put IDK in case people who don't know him. I have a presidential series I did. So I have a short video available about James K. Polk, and then I have a debate with my moderator Harsonet on this president. So where we go back and forth about his presidency. But most people consider Polk to be one of the better American presidents, probably top 20, if not top 15. A B tier. I think I had him in B tier in my tier ranking video. So You can check that out. You can watch my series on the U.S. presidents. You can watch my short video on James K. Polk. I've done a lot of. I even did a series of 5 facts in 15 seconds about U.S. presidents, and I did one on James K. Polk. So there's a lot I've talked about with James K. Polk. I find him a very interesting figure, extremely important. If you don't know, just say IDK. But yeah, go check out that video. Go check out my debate with my moderator Harsonet, and you can learn a lot about that. Hars put the link in the chat. Robert E. Lee was one of the American generals at one side of the war. It's just a fact. Yes, he was an American general on one side of a war fought between Americans. That's an ethnic statement. I have said this before. It is a nuanced topic where you have the Americans fighting a war, the United States destroying the Confederate States of America, a conquered, rebellious nation. That nation is comprised of Americans. So is the United States. That's what makes Reconstruction so damn difficult. And yes, thank you for the voting on Am I Condescending? Most of you said no. For those of you who said yes, I'm sorry. General Sherman practiced total war by destroying everything he touched. Yep, I will crush them was Lincoln's promise in 1864 when he ran for re-election. If Masons were secrets, then how come we know some of the founding fathers were Masons, and what was the religion of the secret society? That's stuff we learned about them afterwards. We don't actually know the religion of a society. It does seem to be, it could be deistic. I'm not sure. Polk was good for America, bad for the natives. Well, most American presidents at that time were really bad for the natives. I don't think that just James K. Polk was bad for the natives. I think that the Mexicans were also bad for the natives, and if you look at how the Mexicans treated the natives in the Economía system and the Ranchero system of California and other places in the Southwest, you find out that it wasn't much better, and that the Comanche and Apache were probably treated better by the United States as bad as they were treated than they were treated by the Mexicans. Let me see here. And thank you for participating in the polls. This is fun. Have you considered that our history with JFK, RMN, and DJT being or attempted to be assassinated, framed, or ruined any influence future candidates? It may, sure, of course it can. I don't know about Richard Nixon being anyone trying to assassinate Nixon. I don't even know that Watergate's an inside job. That's just, the thing about Nixon that's fascinating is people right now in the United States, the political culture is being shaped by the right with Trump's re-election in 2024. And so because of that, right-wingers, conservatives, MAGA people, they have been on a crusade to rehabilitate Richard Nixon. That they look at some of the accomplishments of Nixon's presidency and foreign policy, domestically, although he did set up the stagflation that ruined the economy of the 1970s, but we don't talk about that. And they would not like that he created the EPA, the same organization they're trying to destroy, but who cares about that stuff? Nixon's successes as president, his overwhelming re-election in 1972, a lot of people have thought for a long time that Nixon was framed. But a lot of people see commonalities between Donald Trump and Richard Nixon, and they definitely exist. Nixon believed the 1960 election was stolen from him. Nixon was accused many times of being extraordinarily corrupt and paranoid, or being a megalomaniac. Trump has his enemies. Nixon had an enemies list. There is definitely commonality between both men. There are a lot of interesting parallels. But at the same time, a lot of people have seen what they perceive to be the political persecution of Donald Trump by the deep state, the media, the Democratic Party, whatever you have it, and they see that, the attacks on their guy, and they go back to Nixon and they see him as a victim of the media, him as a victim of the deep state, that the deep state first tried to bring him down. Tucker Carlson did a talk where he said that Nixon told people he knew who killed John F. Kennedy, and because of that, they took him down. So Nixon knew about the dirty secrets of the deep state, supposedly, and that's why Watergate happened, to destroy a man who had been extremely successful as president, who knew about what was going on in secret and might have brought it to the light. I don't see the historical preponderance of the evidence to suggest that. I don't see Watergate being an inside job. I do see both political parties operating in similar ways to how Watergate operated back then, today. And Nixon probably would have gotten away with it if it had been for his ego. If he had just said, yes, I did this, and it was a bad idea, and I'm really sorry. And if he admitted to all of it instead of lying and then saying, when he was found out in lie, saying the president is above the law, he would have been able to stay. He would have really hurt his reputation, but he would have been able to stay for 2 terms. He might have survived an impeachment. And who knows? That means Vietnam does not fully become communist. I don't think Nixon allows Saigon to fall in 1975 like Ford does. That means no Jimmy Carter in the White House. That means no Gerald Ford as vice president. Remember, Ford replaces Spiro Agnew. Although that might have still happened. But Agnew is replaced in a medley of conspiracy and frustration and corruption swimming around the Nixon White House. So some things to think about there. Would you say that okay, is he a good president? So should I change the poll to, is he a great president? Because the debate was James K. Polk. I didn't even think I said during the debate he was a great president. A great president is a hard title to earn with me. I think FDR is a great president. I think Dwight Eisenhower are great presidents. I do not think that James K. Polk is necessarily a great president. I think he's a very good president. And they didn't call Grant the butcher for nothing. True. I voted yes on accident because I don't know what it meant. I'm sorry. Well, at least you voted yes. Let me see here. It's called a civil war between it because it is a war, but no. A civil war is a war between two different groups of people of the same civilization. The English have had many of these, the anarchy, the War of the Roses, of course, their own civil war in the 1640s, the British Civil War. There have been many civil wars in French history. They're between two groups of people that are divided, maybe even politically, but are civilizationally the same, ethnically the same. That is that point about this, about that, whoever made that point about civil wars in other countries actually helped me out. Would you say that other than historical and mythical characters, there is a category of semi-historical characters like Santa and Dracula? Yeah, they are not real, but they have a real presence in history and in society. Absolutely, for us, they're cultural myths. Is there any possibility that American Revolution was a plot by the Masons? No. Charles Cornwallis was transferred to India and he conquered the Indians. Interesting. I didn't know about that, Michael. Thank you for sharing that. I really appreciate your knowledge. So again, Horace, you have to look at all the other civil wars in history and the way we look at them. The American Civil War is different because one country declared independence from another and set up their own country. And that country was conquered by the United States. And so in a way, it is different than other civil wars. Civil wars in Mexico, civil wars in Britain, civil wars in Africa, civil wars throughout all of human history have included groups of people with different political ideologies or cultural ideas fighting against each other within one country, within one society or civilization. The Chinese Civil War is communism, the Comintang versus the Kuomintang, which is the nationalists under Chiang Kai-shek, or Chiang Kai-shek as we call him in the West. Those are examples of civil war that are fought within one country by one group of people. So pointing to other nations' civil wars actually strengthens my point about Robert E. Lee being an American. Let me see. The mafia, so that's Nixon's idea. Nixon believes, and there is evidence to suggest, that Frank Sinatra uses his mafia connections, or his mafia connections just do it because, in Chicago, Sam Giancana, who is a well-known mobster in the Vegas scene when Sinatra is singing with the Rat Pack in the 60s, that the mafia influences the vote totals in Chicago, which swings Illinois, which helps Kennedy win the presidency. So Nixon believed the election was stolen from him, and there is some evidence to suggest the mafia may have had their fingers in the pie. But Nixon, for the sake of national unity, does not ask his supporters to march on the Capitol, which then leads to a riot, but instead bows out gracefully. To be fair, Nixon wasn't the sitting president. It would have been very interesting to see what he had done if he had been the sitting president, but he really didn't make Eisenhower try to stop the election from being certified or anything like that. So, would you blame Richard Nixon for the killings at Kent State? Yes. Nixon was very heavy-handed. I learned that Mithra was the supreme god of Persia before the prophet. Oh, interesting. So he's a Persian deity. And yes, interesting. And it would not be surprising that the Romans, like they did with all the civilizations they conquered or encountered, especially later on in their republican and imperial history, developed cults devoted to various different gods. So there were Romans who almost acted like monotheists in the second or third centuries because they worshipped one particular god, and that god didn't have to be a Roman god like Janus or Jupiter, or it could be It could be Isis. It could be Horus. It could be Mithra. It could be gods of the civilizations that they had either conquered or encountered, like the Persians, the Parthians, so who they never conquered. France and USA have the same flag colors, and is France now Americans? No, it's the pattern that makes them different. And even in Achaemenid Empire, there was a huge Mithra followers until Sassanids assassinated them. That's interesting. I didn't know that. Thank you for sharing that, Faraz. I'd love to learn more about the Achaemenids. Although the Achaemenids were already well gone by the time the Sassanids show up. That's the Parthians and the Greeks in between. History doesn't repeat itself, but it sure does rhyme a lot. Mark Twain, who I'm getting his cigars and his flasks, so maybe tomorrow I'll do my live stream while smoking a Mark Twain cigar. In fact, we're going to do this one more time, folks, and then we'll sign off. I'm having a lot of fun. That's why I'm staying on a lot longer than normal. I almost always go over, but today's a lot. Thank you for voting in that poll. And you go and Hars, did you put the video to the James K. Polk debate so people can go and listen to us go back and forth and decide for themselves? I'm going to do one more poll because these are fun. I don't like smoking inside. Should I smoke a Mark Twain cigar? I mean, Mark Twain is probably, if you're thinking of an American writer, although there are many great American writers, Mark Twain is probably the definitive one, so it made total sense to get these cigars and the flask cigar and use the flask for tomorrow's live stream. I can't. Okay. All right. So there we go. Should I smoke a Mark Twain cigar and use flask tomorrow? I can't put that much text in it, but there you go. Please vote on that when you get the chance. We also have polls on YouTube, like the poll where everybody decided to use noon as our time for the bonus Q&As, which is what this is. This is a bonus Q&A, as this is part of our celebration, our gift to you to celebrate America's 250th birthday. So we will be celebrating that this weekend continually. We've been live streaming since the 26th. We're going to live stream through the 5th. Tomorrow's our normal, where it's a normal schedule, normal timing. Tomorrow at 6 p.m. Eastern, we have our Q&A. And I will be going for an hour, and it looks like I'll be smoking a Mark Twain cigar and maybe using the flask. I don't think I'll put liquor in it. I want to stay sober. I want to stay sharp. And after that, on Saturday, we have our 2-hour Q&A, and I want you to be there at 3 p.m. Eastern, and that'll be for 2 hours about American history exclusively. So it's maybe the best live stream we're ever going to do. And then Sunday is our live stream lecture about the Declaration of Independence and its history. So I'm going to catch up to the chat and then wrap this up. It wasn't Frank Sinatra, it was Joe Kennedy. Joe Kennedy had ties to the mob. Yes, that's true. And what's ironic is that Robert F. Kennedy had been part of a bootlegging operation in the 1920s. Joseph Kennedy was the father of John F. Kennedy. He had an affair with Gloria Swanson, despite being the father of like 9 children with Rose Kennedy. Put away one of his daughters because she was mentally disabled, had her lobotomized, and then basically hid her away from the rest of the family. It's a horrific story what the Kennedys did. I think it's Rose Kennedy? Was it Rose or Mary? One of the daughters. And wanted his sons to be president. His first son, Joseph Jr., died. His second son obviously becomes president, John F. Kennedy, and then dies, is shot and killed in office. And then his third son, Robert F. Kennedy, who actually is sent to, by his brother as Attorney General to his brother. Robert F. Kennedy investigates the mafia, which is seen as a betrayal to the mafia that had helped Kennedy get elected in 1960. Remember, Hoover, who was so corrupt, the mafia had evidence that J. Edgar Hoover was a cross-dresser, which is totally not the conservative image he portrayed, and a person who abuses children. And they had evidence of that, and because he would not, and because they threatened to release it, they blackmailed him, and he refused to acknowledge there ever was a mafia. Then in a police sting operation, all of a sudden, in the 1960s, everybody knew there was a mafia, and everybody was out to get the mafia. But Kennedy's brother, Robert, went after, as Attorney General, the mafia. This was seen as a betrayal, so a lot of people think the mafia actually had Kennedy assassinated in 1963. Frank Sinatra got mentioned. Frank Sinatra had a break with the Kennedys because of the mafia thing, and because of his connections to the mafia. And in 1954, he had made a movie where a man assassinates the president by shooting him, or tries to, by shooting out of a window. And Lee Harvey Oswald watched that movie before shooting at Kennedy. Now, again, I don't think Oswald killed Kennedy. I think I think there's some sort of apparatus that there's grassy knoll stuff. I don't know fully, but it looks almost impossible through physics that Oswald would have been able to get off those shots from that pot in the school bank depository. So, let me see here. Okay, Welch and Harse are going back and forth. So yeah, there's some fun history for you, completely free. But yeah, Joe Kennedy, really corrupt guy. His first son dies. His second son dies in office, an office that he had secured for him, possibly by getting a mafia support. It's very possible the 1960 election was completely clean, not totally dirty or not partially dirty, but completely clean. Kennedy was good looking. He was charming. He was positive. He had a good vision for America. He was a great president. But it's possible. You had a very successful Republican president. It made sense that his vice president should become president after him. I don't know. Anyways, also the televised debates didn't help because Nixon looked like a frail, unhealthy man, which is what he was, and Kennedy looked charming and good-looking, which he was. So, and then his third son, Robert F. Kennedy, runs for president in 1968. Looks like he's on his way to the White House, and he gets killed by Sirhan Sirhan. We talked about this earlier, in California in June of 1968 after winning the California primaries. And then his third son is elected to the Senate, I think that year, or fourth son, Teddy. It's not Theodore, it's Edward, Ted Kennedy, who serves in the Senate for 40 years, runs for president, is one of the last major challengers to a sitting incumbent president. Nowadays, incumbent presidents cannot be challenged when they run for a second term, but there was a strong incumbent challenge by Ted Kennedy against Jimmy Carter in the 1980 primaries. It's a very well-known story. Edward Kennedy is also considered kind of corrupt himself. I mean, the Chippequattuck incident. The Kennedy brothers, both Robert and John F. Kennedy, had affairs with Marilyn Monroe and were told to get rid of her. And some people believe the Kennedys had their hands in the death of Marilyn Monroe. Joseph Kennedy died in 1969 at the age of 79 after watching three sons die young, one of them while being president of the United States, having lobotomized his own daughter and ruined his marriage. It's a really interesting, sad story. Kennedy was the ambassador to Great Britain at the beginning of the last World War, and he told Roosevelt not to help Churchill, but Churchill was too wild and unpredictable. So yeah, I'm going to move on. Let me see. Which Caesar crossed the Rubicon and what dynamics followed? So that's Julius Caesar. He crossed the Rubicon saying, Elia Iacta est, the die is cast, basically going to war with the Roman Republic because the Roman Republic the Senate had asked him to turn in his army. They had allied with Pompey. He knew his life was forfeit if he turned himself in. He also knew his life was in danger if he didn't. So he basically, through an act of war, invaded Italy. And that's what crossing the Rubicon means to this day. You cross a point you can't come back from. You make a definitive decision. And it worked out for Caesar until it didn't. Would Roosevelt like Trump? Which Roosevelt? Teddy? Probably. Franklin? Not so much. Although I think all three of them would agree that the president is a power actor, that the president needs to get things done through aggressiveness. Let me see. And by the way, Harse, just to calm you down, I hate the Confederacy. I hate slavery. I hate what they fought for. Even if Robert E. Lee did not fight to preserve slavery, even if he fought for his state, he fought for the losing side. He made the wrong decision in a terrible conflict. He was a great general. It's impressive what he was able to do on the battlefield. But remember that he killed Americans. Lee also had a huge amount of his land taken and turned into Arlington National Cemetery. I have a video on that if you want to check that out. So again, this isn't to condone the Confederacy or condone the actions or to justify even the decision. Would I even justify the decision that someone would fight for their state rather than their country, even if a reason was not so abhorrent, like preserving slavery? No, I wouldn't necessarily do that. I think the founders set up a federal system, and federal responsibility means you submit to the American government above your own state government on certain issues. But I'm saying that spirit, that fervor in America has existed ever since its founding of regionalism and sectionalism, which is why if a civil war started today over ICE, California would leave the Union and fight against the federal government. It's just obvious. I'm not saying it's a good thing to do. I'm not saying I want that to happen. I'm saying that's what might happen. And you may say, well, they had the high moral ground. The moral ground is not always as clear-cut as you think. And yes, of course, you would say that ICE taking people and things like this is obviously wrong. Well, okay, that's fine. But my point is the moral justifications for why you do what you do aren't always, I like slaves, it's good to have black people enslaved. I don't think Robert E. Lee thought in those terms, and a lot of Southerners did not. They were fighting for their states. It's a wrong decision in principle, and the reason their states seceded was absolutely morally bankrupt, to preserve their way of life, to preserve their economy, as they would say, their lost cause myth. That's all nonsense, by the way. It was to preserve their slaves. Everything in the Southern society was about preserving and continuing slavery and relied on slavery. That's why it took the deep-throated efforts of the Union Army to destroy the entire infrastructure of the South in order to rid that cancer from the world, at least the American world. Howdy, Kenobi. I thought you were supposed to say hello there. If you worship only one God but believe there are other gods, would that be monotheism? It's monotheism. There's another term for it, but it is a polytheism. You recognize the existence of other gods, but you have a centralized form of worship of one God. It's syncretic at the very least. The ancient Jews in the First Temple periods we talked about on Sunday was there. Just because of the same continent, same as Mexico, many other countries. Well, it's not. This is why people don't like calling people from the United States Americans, because Canadians and Mexicans are Americans too. I'm fixing my teeth. These are actually braces, Invisaligns, so they are fixing and readjusting my teeth. You should go back and watch some live streams from a couple years ago, or ask Rodolfo. I have fixed my teeth over the years. They used to be really bad. Why not smoke a Cuban victory cigar? Oh, that'd be fun to celebrate America's victory in the Spanish-American War. I don't have any Cubans because of John F. Kennedy, who, by the way, ordered hundreds of Cuban cigars and kept them, even though he knew it was illegal. He kept them right before he issued the embargo. When was the different time zones throughout the world started being used? That's a good question. I don't know. Early 20th century is when you get, I think, late 19th, early 20th century. Not, you obviously have to have intercontinental connected transportation and communication, so I think it's probably at that time. Daylight savings time impacts that. Things like that comes about in the Great War. Woodrow Wilson creates it. Welch, okay, we're still arguing. Is the mob as it is seen through Hollywood? No, it's over-exaggerated. Obviously, it's Hollywooded, but there is a lot of truth to it. I mean, Goodfellas is the story of Henry Hill, who became an informant in order to save his own skin. To explain, because English isn't my first language and I don't have... Okay, people are just talking. How did the Brits lose it all? They had the Strait of Hormuz. Okay, what's your thoughts on American covering the Japanese bioweapon program, Unit 731? The bioweapon program was one of torment and torture of the Chinese. The Americans did it because they were in the process of rebuilding it, and one of the reasons we don't pay attention to it as much as we should is racism against Asians, whereas the atrocities of the Nazis are on full display at Nuremberg. The atrocities of the Japanese are tried on a local level but do not receive the attention that Nuremberg does. Hideki Tojo was executed for the war crimes he committed at Nanjing, Bataan, and of course Unit 731. There are more Kennedys who died. Obviously, John F. Kennedy Jr. died. Rose Kennedy, I mentioned her lobotomy, her being put away. It's pretty bad. Wendigoon, interesting. That's not a name I would usually listen to, but thank you for the suggestion. What is the date you will do the 2 hour? That is July 4th. So on the July 4th, we will have an exclusively American history Q&A at 3 p.m. Eastern for 2 hours. Tomorrow, 6 p.m. Eastern, and I'll be smoking a Mark Twain cigar and using the flask, but no booze. And I hope you enjoy that applesauce chicken run. Let me see. Bill Harvey, CIA, was responsible for JFK. It's possible. I'm open to different theories. I have a live stream lecture where I go into a lot of detail about how he died. I just think one of the other reasons there's so many theories around why Kennedy died is the American people have been trying to grasp the reason Kennedy has died for 60 years. It's so tragic that this young, charismatic, energetic, brilliant young leader dies in such a horrible way at such a horrible moment. Who knows what would have happened if Kennedy had lived? I don't think the chaos of the 60s is the chaos of the 60s. No, the CSA people are Americans by ethnicity, and they became Americans again, and they were Americans before if they lived through the Civil War. John Foster Dulles as Secretary of State, good or bad? Depends on who you ask. Obviously a Cold Warrior, and like many Cold Wars, were willing to do anything and everything, like J. Edgar Hoover or Richard Nixon even, to dismantle Soviet communism wherever it went, even in the United States, even and in foreign areas, even if it meant propping up spurious governments, like in South Vietnam is a good example of this, or promoting dictatorships, promoting fascism in order to stop communism. It's a terrible, terrible all or nothing at all approach by the Americans in foreign policy during the Cold War. But it's basically anyone who's not a communist is good, even if it's Francisco Franco, Augusto Pinochet, or Juan Perón, who are not good guys. Let me see. Okay, well, I'm sorry, John Dalton. I don't have time to bless your Cash App. Are you going to a barbecue for us? Are you going to barbecue for us? No, I'm not going to barbecue for you, but I will be going to a barbecue on Saturday. Isn't it currently more accurate to describe it as red states versus blue states like LA, San Fran? Yeah, but what I was saying earlier about the divide, there is a divide between red and blue states, but there are municipal divides within a state. The people of the states have their own dynamics. So there's different regions, there's different climates, there's different ethnic groups in different parts of the state, and that can create divides within that state. The people in upstate New York do not look at New York City the way the people of New York City look at them. There is a lot of regional divide and rivalry between Buffalo and New York City. But that doesn't mean, but they would both be united in a contest between what's better, New York or New Jersey. And in that way, they might be very well united in going up against the United States itself as New Yorkers. They denied Spain the Marshall Plan, though. Well, Spain wasn't in the war, so that's one reason they denied it. But they allowed Franco to stay in power, which they absolutely probably shouldn't have done. The USA should balkanize? Yeah, that would be great. Anyways, I'm going to sign off. We almost did the 2-hour live stream today, and a lot of it was U.S. history, so that's pretty good. And the background is the victory at New Orleans, which made Andrew Jackson a national hero. Spain was kind of communist. Don't tell that to Francisco Franco. Did President Biden use actual Cloward and Piven strategy? Don't know. I'm sorry. I wish I could help you out, Jason. You're a member. I always like to answer member questions in detail because they're members. Memberships get early access and all of that. Give a super chat. All of the money that goes into that, into the channel, I use to make the channel better. Thank you for the super chats today from Jason and CSR, I think, gave it. I appreciate that. Can you do Waterloo for the next background? I'm doing American history backgrounds only. Next weekend is the British birthday, July 11th, and Canada Day was yesterday. So I will do a British background, and I will do Waterloo is obviously a great British moment, so I could do that, yeah. Cloward Piven. What is Cloward Piven? Can someone tell me? Was General Patton right about Europe being dead? Partially, obviously, it was heavily devastated. Its infrastructure was decimated, and its society would change. And it would be a society that would be dominated by U.S. foreign intervention and geopolitical interests as American hegemony really came to dominate Britain, France, and West Germany, and then really all of Europe by the end of the Cold War. The East got swallowed up by the communists. And Patton really believed, it's really interesting, what would have happened had America fought a war against the Soviet Union? I think Americans had a better chance of winning against the Soviet Union than the Nazis, than the Wehrmacht did during Barbarossa, and probably than Napoleon. But still, defeating the Russians is not easy, especially when you have so much land to take over, because you got to get all of Germany, and you got to get into Poland and Hungary. It would have been really, really hard. Coward Piven strategy is the way to overload governmental systems with fraud and unnecessary things to collapse and to make something better with them, like the welfare state. So basically, sabotage it, blow it up, and then restart. Interesting. That might be true. I'm not sure about that. Yeah, that's a fair way to say it. But the British won the war, and then the Americans were like, guess what? You have to get rid of all your colonies now. I'm required America subjected. Yeah, and in a way, that's exactly what happened. So they were in a state where they were definitely weak enough where, yeah, the U.S. did step in. That's why the Japanese war crimes also aren't talked about, because the Japanese became Japan became America's sandbox. They used Japan with a military occupation until 1953. They redid the Japanese political and economic system, and they used Japan as their base of operations during Korea. Interesting. Thank you for that, Hars. I appreciate you bringing that up. If it ain't broke, break it. Oh, so destroy it so you can rebuild something. Okay, so it's a deconstructionist Derrida kind of system where you take something that's all working fine or seems okay, you make it bad so you can destroy it and build whatever you want in its place. I would not be surprised. Patton was pretty loony at times. Coward and Piven were people, I believe, wife and husband, professors in the university. They were socialists. Thank you, Hars. See, I didn't know that. I learn things from you guys all the time. Cloward and Piven. It sounds like deconstructionist, Derrida, Foucault, Herbert Marcuse, the Frankfurt School. This basically the idea that the real way to understand things is by breaking them down, and believing in their opposites. So you can't. So the ancient and medieval theory was you cannot have good, you cannot have evil without good. Deconstructionism says you cannot have good without evil. You need evil. You need the opposite. The opposite is good, and the good is not good. So tearing down what is considered to be traditional good, whatever it might be, is necessary. Alan Dulles, the idea was an English teacher in India when he was 20. That's interesting. Didn't know that. Do you think communism can ever be achieved peacefully, friendly history? No, I don't. And the people and for all of the people in this society and in this world who thinks that real communism hasn't been tried and we just have to try it, get ready for millions of people to die. Because people who say, oh, well, Lenin just took Marx and ignored him. It's not true, first of all. Lenin reinterpreted him for his own context, but Lenin understood Marx very well. Marx said you need violent revolution. People will often say, well, Trotsky was so much more enlightened than Stalin. Trotsky would have been excellent. Trotsky's advocacy for global revolution would have cost tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions of lives lost in a world that had a much smaller global population than it did today. That's part of my point with the 7 Years' War. You had a much smaller population, people's lives were a lot shorter, so casualties are not as many. So that's another reason people write off a 7 Years' War. And the Long March obviously pays homage back to Mao's Long March, in which he saved the communist movement in China. So, what about hookah smoking? I do like hookahs. I've had hookahs. Middle Eastern, very cool. The Sino-Soviet split prove that communism is a fool's errand. It proves that communists will have different interpretations of communism, disagree about that. Mao believed he was the real communist in that between him and Khrushchev, and that Khrushchev was the bastardization of Stalin's ideas. But Maoism is different than Stalinism, which is different than Leninism, which many would argue is different than Marxism. They are all interpretations of Marx. They are all interpretations of communism fit to a particular cultural lens because industrialized societies never wanted communism. And Marx knew this. That's why he advocated violent revolution as the only way to achieve it. But what is your favorite history channels on YouTube? Thank you, Jorge. Well, obviously my own. I appreciate that. I don't share my religious views, PC. I have a lot of respect and love for Islam. Assalamu alaikum. But I don't share my religious perspectives. I've done plenty of videos on Islam if you want to learn about it. There have been 3 world wars in my opinion. The 7 Years' War is the first one. World War II would be the Great War, and then the war with the Nazis and the Japanese is World War III. What is your favorite history channels on YouTube? So Jorge, these are new people, and I want to answer their questions because I want them to like and subscribe, hopefully. Tea Time with Lindsay Holiday is where I get most of my royal information, like Brits and stuff like that. History Matters, I think, is the best. Prometheus does amazing videos, or Epimetheus, sorry, does amazing videos where he covers a country's history, which is really fun. And obviously, I'm going to recommend my own. I have one more, so I had 4 I mentioned. Septum does some really good ranking videos. So yeah. All right, we went 2 hours today. So you got 2 hours today as our last bonus Q&A because we don't normally broadcast Mondays, Tuesdays, Wednesdays, or Thursdays, but we did this week because we're celebrating American history. We're celebrating America's 250th birthday, and so our gift to you is the 4 bonus live streams. We are live streaming every day from June 26th, last Friday, when we normally live stream Friday, Saturday, Sunday, through July 5th. So please check that out. Join us tomorrow at our normal time where I will be smoking a Mark Twain cigar to celebrate America's greatest writer and favorite son. And then on Saturday, check out another 2-hour live stream, a planned 2-hour live stream, where I will be talking about the history of, where I'll be answering questions only about American history, and I want you to be there. And then Sunday, our live stream, and that's at 3 p.m. Tomorrow's is at 6 p.m. Those are the normal times. 6 p.m. on Fridays for Q&A. 3 p.m. on Saturdays for Q&A. So before you go to all your barbecues and see your fireworks, check out the fireworks on this channel. And then on Sunday at 4 p.m. Eastern, I have my Declaration of Independence live stream lecture where I will be discussing the Declaration of Independence. Check out all the long, short, and life-form content. I got a lot of American history there and a lot of history from all different types of the world. If you're sick about talking about America, I would understand at that point. I will be too, probably by July 5th. But there is a video coming out on this weekend. I try to do 2 long-form videos a week, and I do daily short videos where I analyze and read the Declaration of Independence. So please check that out when you get the chance. Yeah. They have the right to work. I don't know what you're talking about. Mao was pulling my hair in the field, screaming in front of me, "Where is your God, you weak scholar?" That sounds like Mao. Is only American history for July 4th. I am not, but I want you there, Ding Fox Boy. You can learn about American history. You know a lot about other types of history, but I'd like you to be there on Saturday because I know you like a lot of European history. But yeah, we'll be talking about all different types of American history, small and big. Emperor Norton, Abraham Lincoln, stuff like that. Is it true that Anglicans never bathed during the medieval times? The Muslims did introduce soap to Spain, Al-Andalus. Let me see. I want to make sure I've got everything. Yeah, I really enjoyed today's. Today's was very nice. We got over the tech issues quickly, thank God. Did slaves have rights in the Roman Empire? Some, but not a lot. But I don't know why you have to yell that out, Georgie Porgy. Yeah, they had some rights, and some of them could rise in esteem and social class, and some of them could buy their freedom, but they had tens of millions of slaves in there. Do Anglicans still have descendants in America? Which city? Anglicans, there are English descendants in all throughout the United States, yes. And yeah, so 6 p.m. Friday, 3 p.m. Saturday, 4 p.m. Sunday. Those are our usual times anyways, but a 2-hour one on Saturday exclusively about American history. And tomorrow join me as I will be doing some Mark Twain, well, not cosplaying, but I'll be smoking a Mark Twain cigar with my Mark Twain flask. I won't be getting drunk though. Why was John Tyler so boring? He wasn't boring. He died as a Confederate traitor. And yes, Robert E. Lee can still be an American and still be a traitor. I'm not ignoring you, Georgie. I just answered you. Subscribe, like, and if you become a member, you get even more bonus access and early access and bonus material, so we really appreciate that. Take care. Have a great rest of your day. I'm going to sign off. We've gone over 2 hours. We were only supposed to go 1 hour. But I did answer you, Georgie, I forget what your question was, sorry. But don't use all caps. Don't yell at me. Thoughts on how lucky we are to have modern medicine compared to ancient and medieval methods of healing and treating the sick? Definitely blessed. I mean, leeches, the 4 humors. I understand why they felt the way they did. We give Galen too hard of a time. I mean, those were breakthrough progressive medicines back then. Obviously not going to help today. So, all right, take care, everybody. Like and subscribe on your way out. Double tap the screen, like the live, subscribe to more, and vote on the poll. I'm going to go ahead and end that. It looks like I'm going to be dressed up like Mark Twain tomorrow. Or not dressed up, but smoking one of his cigars. Join us for Saturday, and tomorrow's at 6 p.m., and Sunday at 4 p.m., and Saturday at 3 p.m. 2 hours. Anyways, you missed my reply. I don't know why the stream is dropping. There shouldn't be any struggles right now. I thought we fixed the issues. We're very lucky to have modern methods of medicine, but we give the ancients too hard of a time. It's not like they didn't know anything. It's just that they had really, really counterintuitive and convoluted views about medicine. Let me see. The CSA never established peace treaty, was never recognized that they are Americans, just rebels. Exactly. All right, take care, guys. Albrecht, I hope you got your answer you wanted. Like on your way out. See you later. Check out all the content available, all that great stuff, yada, yada. Love history. Bye-bye.